There we go.
All right, we're live. Okay, guys, this is great. Thank you so much for joining us. This is a record number for us on on a hangout. I think there's 8 of us or something like that. This is very exciting. I kind of can't believe the technology is working. Um, before we dive in, I just want to say that if there's a lot of background noise, you might want to do what Cece did, which is you can see and Ryan, I guess, as well, which is to mute the microphone so that the person who's talking gets the floor. And then when you want the floor, you can just unmute your microphone. You don't have to if there's not going to be a lot of background noise or if you have a headset. But in the event that you don't. Okay, so while we're here, let me just read Deb's blurb here. And Deb's blurb is not coming up. So what I'd like to do first is introductions, and so please go around and say your name, and then what your affiliation is, so what your camp is, where in the world you are, and if this is your first hangout, I want you to say that as well. So Cece, why don't we start with you?
Okay, now I'm unmuted. I am Cece Palazola. I'm the Director of Community Education at Memphis College of Art. I'm not even going to tell you what the temperature is here because you'll all be jealous. But, I am a recent member of Raise the Bar and the ACA, and we are going for accreditation this summer for our summer art camp. And this is my first hangout.
All right, so yeah, okay, fine. Tommy, and then Tim, and then Ryan, and then Pat, and then Elizabeth. Heather, excuse me.
My name is Tommy Feldman from Camp Granite Lake, and I'm in Boulder, Colorado, and I've been to a few of these hangouts before.
Tim Lucas, you're up.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Tim Lucas with the John Austin Sheely Foundation. We are based here in sunny and fairly dry Denver, Colorado. This is my first hangout and first engagement with Raise the Bar, so excited to participate.
Cool. I'm Ryan Dale. I'm with AdventureLinks in Clifton, Virginia, right outside of Washington, D.C. And this is my first hangout, second hangout maybe. It depends on what Matt and I consider a hangout. It's part of one a couple weeks ago. So. Cool.
It's great. We've got Pat Hill Blackmore and Ryan Underhill here from the Tim Horton Children's Foundation, and we're in beautiful sunny St. George, Ontario, Canada. We have the 6 camps here in Canada, and we have 1 in Kentucky as well.
And this is our first hangout.
And this is our first hangout, yes.
Good.
All right, so Heather, can you hear us or see us? We cannot see you. All right, Heather's having audio trouble. Heather, you can also chat. I just put your name in the chat, and maybe there's, if you're having trouble with your audio, you could help us help you in the chat. Hear you and see you, but we cannot hear you. Okay, so Heather's there. All right, so I'm going to introduce Deb Bialeschki, Dr. Deb Bialeschki of the American Camp Association, Director of Research. We're here to get a 5-minute overview of the ACA's Youth Outcomes Battery, the Youth Self-Report, as well as staff and parent observation versions, followed by the most common pros and cons to the YOB's use. Then we'll cover any questions you might have. Everyone will leave the hangout with a copy of the Independence Scale for youth with ideas for use. And so what we're going to do is we're going to hand it over to Deb, and Deb is going to say some things for a short period, she says, although we'll believe that when we see it. And then we're going to turn the floor over to you guys, and you guys can ask her whatever you have in mind. I don't know, some of you may be using it, some of you may be looking at it, some of you may be planning at using it this summer. We want to hear from you. We're going to cut off at 3:30, And then if you want to jet after that, that's fine. And if you want to stick around, Deb will I'm sure, answer questions for until she's blue in the face. All right, so without further ado,
Yes.
Deb Bialeschki, take it away.
All right, and those of you that know me know what Matt was saying is true, because I love to talk about this stuff. I get excited and can go on forever, but to guard against that, I don't even have a PowerPoint today. What I have are a couple of things I want to talk about, and I truly just want to see what kind of questions you guys have, what kinds of concerns you might have, and then at the very end, remind me to tell you about how to get your independence version. Okay, so the YOB. First of all, kudos to the Not-for-Profit Council, and somebody mentioned being a part of that. They are the group that has funded 99% of all the work around the YOB. So I always have to give them kudos. The YOB came about after the first national outcomes study, because people said, hey, this is great. We don't want to use this big long form. We don't want to do a pre-test, post-test, and 6-month follow-up. Can you make something simple, something that we can customize? And so that's what we did. When you look at the YOB, there are 11 outcomes that you can use to measure. Those 11 outcomes were decided by the Not-for-Profit Council. They said, here are some ones that we really care about. Are there lots of others that we could do? Absolutely. But since they were giving us the money, we said, great, you get to call the shots on that. So there's no magic, no anything other than that these are ones that the not-for-profit camps were really interested in. So when we looked at that, we said, okay, so what are the common questions that people want answered around the kind of development that's happening in camp with their kids? And they said, and we use the directors a lot when we were building these things, they said, we want something that lets us know if the kids increased or not. Great, that's the first one. If you want to measure, did the kids increase on some outcome, you're going to use this version over here that we call basic. And it's simple, 5 Likert points on there. At the end of that, it tells you whether the kids increased in independence, or did they stay the same, or did they not? Maybe they decreased. Then they said, there's another thing that we'd like to have answered. Sometimes we want to know about increases, but other times we want to know just how the kid is on that particular outcome. So we'll stay with independence. So we want the kid to tell us how independent they think they are. No holds barred, nothing to do with camp, just in general, answer these questions about yourself. And then for each one of those 6 items, you can measure independence with 6 items, you will tell us how much of this feeling about yourself, being an independent person, you can attribute back to camp. The fancy name for that is status plus change version of a retrospective pre-test, post-test design. The simple one is, I just need the detailed version of the YOB. And as the name implies, if you don't want to do a pre-test, post-test, this version will function like a pre-test, post-test, but you just give it once at the end of the session. So, depending on the question, you have to know what your question is that you want answered so you can choose the right one. Most of the time, camps will start out with the increase one. They just want to know, did the kids increase? We don't care exactly where they are on this. We just want to know if they increase or not. Basic version works. It's good for kids that are at least 9 or 10 years old on up. So it can be paper. We've had paper pencils, what everybody's been using in the past. We created a little free Excel template that would help you analyze your data. This has all been moved now to an online version. So if you want to do the basic version, what I will tell you is go to the YOB 2.0 because it's online. You can use iPads or tablets, other laptops to collect your data. You eliminate all the data entry issues, which is a big problem I'll talk about at the end for most people. So those are the kid report versions of the YOB. The Not-for-Profit Council said, this is great, having kids tell us what they're doing is fine, but you know, we got some camps that have little tiny kids. We got a bunch of day camps that run kids that are like 5 years old, you know, and we do have a young camper learning version that you can do with little tinies if you want to, but they were like, you know, we'd really like to have something an adult would do. So the other two versions that exactly parallel the kid version is one for staff and one for parents. And the way these work is staff observe, and there's like on independence, there's only 4 things that a staff person has to look at. And they would look at that at the beginning, you know, you would do your staff training, get them kind of clued in on this. And now at the end of that session with that little tiny kid, they would go, okay, on these 4 things, for little Johnny, I saw this. For little Susie, I saw this. And so the staff, they're working most closely with that group of kids, you know, maybe 8 or 10 little kids. It's in a day camp group or a cabin group or whatever. The staff people that work most closely with those kids would do this. Great. So now you can have an adult version of independence. The funny thing is that when we ran the stats on this, it works great across the board. So you can do the staff observation on your 17-year-old leadership kids if you want. And what's kind of cool is to have the kids do it and then to have the staff do it. I'll tell you right now, they never match because the kids always think that they're different than what an adult is. And why would we think they would be the same anyway? So those are the 3 versions of the YOB, all measuring the same thing. The only thing is the staff and the parent version, and the parent mirrors exactly what the staff version is. It's just set for parents. We can't have an adult say anything about spiritual well-being. We feel like there's no way an adult can talk about what and observe spiritual well-being in a child. So that one doesn't get measured by either one of those. And then there's a measure for family citizenship, and we feel like a parent can do that one, but a staff member can't. They can't see how the kid comes back and functions as a member of a family now. So those are the versions that are out there and available. Here are sort of the pros to the YOB. And before I even say that, I'm going to say the YOB is not made for everybody. Not everybody will like it, and that's great. For people that want something, though, it's available and it's a good start. It is not comprehensive. You know, it is not going to cover every single thing, and ACA will never have measures to cover every single thing camps do. One, how could we ever do that? And 2, there's really great measures that are out there that we don't need to replicate. If you want to measure grit, go use Duckworth's, 6-point grit scale. I mean, why would we ever want to waste time and money on reinventing something that's already really good? So, we try and at ACA, we try and match people up with some of these outside really great resources. And for our own community, we've developed these measures that we couldn't find good measures for, and that's how we got to where we are. So another challenge that goes along with this is we may not have what you need, but if we do, there's investment. And people go, oh, evaluation is so easy. Well, for me, it's easy because, my gosh, I've spent my whole career doing it. It's not easy necessarily to come in and do this. And so people that are like in Raise the Bar that are doing this, my hat is off to you because evaluation takes time. It can take money, but the time is the biggest thing. Because it's your time in thinking about it and thinking about what do we want to answer and why do we want to answer that. And once we get an answer, what the heck are we going to do with it? And you have to answer all those questions before you even get started. And then, it's an investment of your time there, but it's also an investment of your time because you can't just have your staff randomly doing stuff and thinking you're going to be intentionally targeting independence unless you do some staff training around that. At the minimum, I usually tell camps, choose to measure 1 or maybe 2 things your first year and make sure you get your staff intentionally on board with you on that. If you're going to measure independence and you don't do anything in staff training to help them figure out how in the world, as a wrangler, I do independence in my job, they're 18 and 19 years old, for heaven's sakes. They aren't going to make those connections automatically. This might be their first job. It might be their first job working at camp. So for you to come in and say, oh, this is really great, we're going to look at independence, that 18-year-old kid is over there going, oh my gosh, I got to test all those horses. I got to figure out, which horse is going to be the good match for this kind of rider. Their brains are just not going to be there. So it does take staff time, and then it takes a little bit of kid time. And like I said, these are really short measures. They are, our shortest one is 5 questions long. The longest one is social skills. That's 13 items. So these are not long. And I've given them, you know, after lunch, the second to the last day of the session. And the kids can sit down and go through 2 or 3 outcomes really quickly. And it's not a big deal to them. You know, you have to front load it, so it's like, hey, we really want to hear from you. We want to know your ideas. This will help us, you know, make camp be even better for kids that come after you guys. It's really important, you know, our staff, you really want to understand, you know, what's gone on with you. So you can front load it to be not a burdensome thing. But it does. It takes time. You're going to have to carve out 15 minutes or whatever it's going to take to do the measures. The upside of it is now you've got your own data. You can tell your story with your data, and I think they make great marketing messages. They're great to use with your funders. Almost every funder wants to see what the impact of their dollars are. And stories are fabulous, and I would really urge you to use stories, but to have your data back behind it, because they are smart people and they like the good story. Everybody likes having a little tear roll down your cheek, hearing a heartwarming story, but most of them will follow up and say, wow, that's such a great story, and what do you got to back that up with? And you're like, I don't know. So this gives you some really good information. That ties into the next pro, which is these have all been vetted. We have great metrics associated with this, and in fact, our measures were picked up. WT Grant funded the Forum for Youth Investment and pulling together a compendium of outcomes, of the best outcomes measures that are out there. They have 9 measures. ACA's is one of them. So that in itself was like, woohoo, we scored really big. But what it does is it gives us credit for doing the creation right, having the right metrics, doing the right testing, making sure it's reliable, making sure it's valid, and there's a lot of instruments out there that never go through that process. So that just means that what you get back, you can trust. The last thing I'm going to count as a pro is one that you might look at and say, that's kind of a negative to me. The data will tell you things that you may not necessarily expect. Sometimes it's great, and sometimes people look at it and go, wow, that is not what I expected, and I don't really like it. Well, I think that's a win. One, because now you know what you didn't know. And I mean, if you're not doing what you think you're doing, then why would you want to go out there and have that false illusion behind your work? So now you've got some information here. Some of it's going to be great. Some of it's like, hey, now this is something we can work on. And so here's sort of my closing thought on this, and I want to see what you guys think. I think evaluation has been looked at as a tedious, just burden to place on a person. It's usually the last thing on our list. Oh, if we get to it, we're going to do it. Oh, if we got a little extra money, we might do that. And in reality, it's just out there almost as an accountability measure that people are like, I just as soon forget that whole thing. I don't care if I have data. I don't care to know this. In my heart, I think we're doing a good job. I don't need something over here that's maybe going to tell me something different. But I think that's because we've used evaluation as accountability for way too long. I think we need to have sort of a mind shift and start talking about evaluation as learning. And who doesn't want to learn? I mean, if you think you're doing that, what better thing to do than to have some data that actually shows that, hey, your camp is maybe different than that camp down the road. We've got actual information here that says we are making an impact. These kids think that they are increasing in independence, and when our staff look or when our parents respond, they think that we're making a difference around independence. We've got the hard data here now. It's not just us thinking that we're doing this. We've got the information here. And I think funders are getting pretty savvy on this. I mean, it's great, but they want to see something that they can then share with their donors. And so, again, the impact of having some good data. And here's the other interesting thing that I found with working with funders. I'm working with several different granting groups right now. They don't care if you find something unusual that's not particularly good the first year, it's like, hey, this is great. Our money, you're using that now. Our money is going to change staff training. Our money is being used now to look at making some programming changes. Our money is going to understand this experience from the kid perspective in a way that's different. Now, if you get negative results year after year after year, and you're not ever making any changes in anything, well then, yeah, they're probably not going to be happy, and then the accountability piece is going to kick in. But my experience with funders is they're really interested in that you learn stuff. And if you find something that's a little different than what you expected, yay rah. So I'm going to stop there and see what you guys have for questions, or what other things are out there on your minds.
There was a lot of jargon in there, guys, and there's some stuff, concepts or terms that you may not understand. Does anybody want to ask some of those questions that where you sort of feel like a dummy for asking? Because this is great. There's
no dummy. No dummy here.
Well, I have something that's not about the terminology so much as about the focus of the measures themselves. So we're a visual art-based day camp. And so my question is around how many of those measures, or to what degree will the battery suit our needs?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think I had a similar question. We've been working with NASA as an education partner, and I had a really fascinating discussion with them about it, because they're so focused on the science and the STEM pieces and measuring all that. And I'm going like, you guys are really cutting yourself short on this. Because just because you're focusing on STEM, or just because you're focusing on arts, doesn't mean you aren't still contributing to a lot of those like character pieces or soft skills or life skills, whatever you want to call it, that's really, really important for that child to grow up and be a contributing adult. So who doesn't want to know that the kids are working together better as a team? And you're talking about visual arts, but I was thinking about theater arts, where you're working together to put on a production. Maybe there's some equivalent with that. And as you think about it, you go down through and look at that list of outcomes that we have, I would say you're probably doing lots of things. There's problem solving. A kid that's doing art is not, they're doing more than just creating a really nice picture. There's lots of stuff going on there. They're working with other kids. They're trying to get some problems worked out in their head. Maybe the visual perspective is challenging them, and they need to understand about perspective. So there's things that's going on in those kids' heads. And what I would challenge you is to come back and say, what is it beyond the art piece, the very content-driven pieces, are you doing? What do you think you're contributing in terms of this overall development of this young person now, to help them grow up to be a contributing member of society?
Sure, and we do a lot of that, Deb. We do a lot of staff training around youth development issues and types of training and interactions. So it may be more germane than I think.
I think looking down through those outcomes, maybe you just pick out one thing on those outcomes list that start out with that you would look at and go, wow, we do this, and we say we do. It's inherent to our mission, and we've just never really thought about it in that way before. So as you think about that, CC, you can come back. You guys, and this is true for all of you, if you want to call or drop me an email or whatever, we can follow up one-on-one on some of these, but I have yet to find a camp that isn't doing something that ties in, even with these 11 measures. I think there's something in this group that will probably fit almost everybody. There's always going to be an exception. Now, what's the age of your kids, Cece? Are they older kids, or are they tiny little kids?
We run camps for as young as 3 and 4 years old, all the way up through age 18.
Yeah, so you would definitely be wanting to look at some of those different versions, because with your little tinies, you probably would want them, to be sort of looked at by that adult. But even then, here's another thing that I'm going to throw out there. I think kids today love to be asked their opinions. And I think that they can be really sort of brought on board as far as being part of your evaluation team, that letting kids have a say, even your little bitty ones. The young camper learning version that's out there, it's paper yet. I mean, you're going to have to deal with paper if you wanted to do that. But there's some creative ways of getting a 6-year-old to talk about their experience. So maybe you don't stay true to the measure itself. Maybe it's something you just have your staff or CITs are great at doing this, to sit down and even just process some of those questions and use them as a way of letting the kids. So they're not going to actually fill out the survey, but you're still going to get them used to the idea of, hey, people want to know what happened to me. They care about my opinion. So of course I want you to use the YLB, and of course I want you to have quantitative measures. And there's some really good qualitative things. Quantitative is number data, qualitative is word data, or some kind of visual data. So there are different ways of getting at this. It doesn't have to just be the YOB. But I think getting kids and staff to understand that you care about their opinions and that you want to make things better, I think that goes a long ways to starting to change the culture around the evaluation and the role that it plays within your camp. What else do you guys have? Quiet. Crickets.
All right, I got a couple. So how do you know, let's say you pick a couple measures and you get your numbers back. How do I know if our numbers are any good?
So, good question. One of the things that we did with the YOB is we created norms. All norms are benchmarks around a particular whatever. In this case, they're developmental outcomes. And so here's how norms are created. You go out and you get a bunch of kids to all fill out the independence scale. Some of the camps that they're at might be intentionally targeting independence. That's okay, because there's going to be a whole bunch of them that probably aren't. And so you get this big group of kids to respond, a couple thousand, randomly. It's important that they're just random kids. And you do a few little statistical metrics, and it comes up with a benchmark number. So the way we have created our norms is we'd say, okay, here's the average. If you do independence, the average on independence is 3.56 or whatever. So you could come back and you could look at this and go, wow, ours is 3.3. Was that good or not? And I would come back and I would say, well, are you happy that you're below the average? When the average doesn't really represent intentionality, and you theoretically were intentionally targeting independence. So your average is below that. So, what else might be going on there? And if you use the new online tool, the stats are so much easier, because that's one of the downsides of doing evaluation is you have to do something with the data. If it's quantitative data, you got to run some stats. So you could look at that and go, holy cow, look at the difference between the boys' independence scores and the girls' independence scores. And we know that in society in general, girls usually score lower on independence than boys do. And lo and behold, when we look at our numbers, they are. The averages are less. So you can kind of look at that average thing and you could say, okay, is this good or not? It goes back to what you personally, your camp, kind of sets up. But here's the other thing that the norms do. You take that average, and we've built 10% in increments. So you could look at that average, and on the average in general might show you that you're at the 40th percentile. That means 60% of the camps are actually even better on independence than what you are. So if it's me, I probably wouldn't be that happy about independence unless, this was the first year and I really wasn't doing that much with it. I was just sort of benchmarking. So that would be the first thing, would be to look at that. And then when I would look at the further breakdowns and I'd look at the girls and the boys, I would see that the boys were actually above where the average is for boys, and the percentiles, that percentile might be the boys percentile might be 80%, and the girls might be down in 30%. And you could go, holy cow, we need to find out what's going on there. Now, are our staff doing things differently, where they're having boys do things in a way that really promotes independence more than what our staff is doing with the girls? You know, so it gives you a place to start asking questions. So to me, there's not really any bad data. There's data that just makes for asking a lot of questions. Can you trust it? Absolutely, because all of the metrics have been done. So whatever you get back is, quote, trusted, you know, it's reliable, it's valid. It's what you do with it next that really makes the difference. Does that make sense?
Just building on that statement, Deb, using the whole concept of evaluation as a continuous improvement cycle with your program development and your staff training, that's something we've really embraced here in the work that we do, because we found out when we started to do some measures, and we're not using the YOB right now, but when we were doing some of the measures and reporting on our evaluation, we found that we were weak in areas related to our logic model, how we did programming, so we became more intentional with our staff development and the language that the campers were hearing and the experiences they were having and how it was debriefed and unpacked. So I think it's important, like you commented on the fact of evaluation being used for accountability, but I think it's more valuable as a continuous improvement cycle.
Yep. And I think that when you start getting your data back, like Matt, you were saying, well, what do I do with the data? You know, is it good data? You know, I think that what it does is it opens a lot of doors for things just like what you were talking about. Because until you know what your kids think about your program, you're just sort of second guessing. And so, I mean, we found that consistently in all of our projects, that camp directors tend to be surprised by what the kids think about things. Your adults, you know, you guys are all usually on the same page, but sometimes the kids have a different reality than what you knew until you actually have the data. So I think, to me, the data are really good if they make you question and they make you look at things differently than what you might have looked at before. And to me, that's a really, really good thing. And if you get some really good, strong data, that's great. Fabulous marketing messages can come out of some of the things. And I mean, who doesn't want to just kind of shout that in your promotional materials? Hey, you know, the kids that come to our program leave here being more independent than when they came. I mean, who doesn't like that? I mean, that's a great statement to be able to say.
Tim, Ryan, Tommy.
Tommy, I know you guys have been collecting data at your program, and again, I mean, of course, I'm talking about the YOB, and I like it, but I know some of you are using some different things, but you're still having some of the same issues of the challenges or the rewards of doing it. What is it that you guys are kind of doing, and you know, what is it that you're thinking about for the summer or whatever?
Well, actually, we when we started out 11 years ago, we did for the first handful of years, and then it fell off. And since we've started the resident camp, because we started off as a day camp, we haven't done any. And actually, we signed up to do the YOB 2.0. So
awesome.
That's I'm just here, just getting a little more familiar with it. Directly, and that's our plan for the summer. So awesome. As I said before, the camp was sort of founded on some of the research that came out 10 or 12 years ago, and we're just getting back into it.
Good. That's awesome. And, you know, since Tommy gave me the opportunity to reemphasize a point I made earlier, just for heaven's sake, start out at a reasonable way. One thing, you know, maybe two, that you can really just test it out. I wish there was another Ryan that's out in California. I wish was on this, because Ryan talks about the disastrous first year of how he went in, and it was just like, oh my gosh, you know, everything. I heard him say, I mean, everything I could do wrong, I probably did wrong the first year, and that's great. I mean, it's not great. It's not great for you, but just know that's so typical, you know, and you can do a lot to sort of minimize some of that. But your first year, you're just going to learn a ton of stuff, and your data. I mean, to me, the data are almost secondary that first year, because you're getting it worked out. You're getting it figured out how to do this and how to make the time. And so if you feel a little discouraged, if you've never done it before and your first year is not this fabulous, like, eye-opening thing, I would say don't give up. I always tell people, commit for 2 years. Don't quit after the first time, because the first year is really challenging for a lot of people. You got to commit to seeing it through on 2 years. And then after that, you know, you might need to really shift the way you're thinking about it, but commit to 2 years.
Kind of going on that, so we've never measured data here at AdventureLinks, so this is all completely uncharted territory for us, and I've been looking into the YOB, but can you just briefly talk about maybe tips for implementing the YOB and then also selecting outcomes that we would want to measure?
Right. Okay, let me go with the first one. I can't remember who it was, but you mentioned about a logic model. That sounds so intimidating, but all it is tying what you think you do because of your mission back to something that fits this developmental outcome. Now remember, there's all kinds of outcomes. We're talking about developmental outcomes here. There are tons of outcomes that you can measure. But the developmental ones, you need to be kind of thoughtful about that. For some people, they will look down that list of ACA things and they'll go, ooh, this one, this teamwork one, that ties in perfect with our mission. You know, we're all about that. So that makes, sometimes it's that simple. And then other people have real elaborate processes that they will use. And that's great. If you have an organization that goes through and you really build out your logic model, you have all the pieces for the logic model right now. Whether you know it or not, you really do. It's just a matter of fitting them into these little prescribed boxes. But all the logic model says, well, if we do, if we have really good staff and we train them around independence, then we should be able to impact what we see is happening with our kids. And so it's a bunch of if-then statements. So if we have resources, then we should have good staff and training and infrastructure. And if we have that, then we should be able to offer these really great programs that's going to promote independence, like, you know, backpacking or writing or whatever it is. And if we do those programs, then we should see that developmental outcome that we're targeting. We should see some effect there. Okay. And if we achieve that, then we should see a long-term thing. So looking down the list is probably a good starting point. The second thing is to figure out what is the question you're trying to answer. If all you want to know if did the kids increase, then go to that basic one. And that's where I would say 90% of the camps start, is with that basic version. Try one thing. And here's another thing I didn't mention this. You don't have to measure every single kid. Never choose your first session because everybody's still getting stuff figured out. Don't choose your last one because everybody's kind of like winding down. Choose one of the sessions in the middle. And you might choose, let's say you're running a whole bunch of different programs, but let's say you have this backpacking group, you have a leadership group, and then you have sort of a general camp group that happens in session 2. You have those 3 areas. Great. Just collect the data from some of the kids that's in there. You don't even have to have all of the kids. Okay. You know, your camp may be offering 5 or 6 things. All you're doing is going to go to the kids that's in those 3 areas, because those 3 areas you think are going to be interesting to look at in terms of this thing around independence. You think backpacking is doing that, and your staff are probably doing a lot with independence. You think your leadership is. Your general camp, well, yeah, all of your staff have been trained around independence, but people would say, do they get a chance to be independent in the same way as what they do in backpacking or in the leadership group? So it makes sense that you could just pull out those 3, the kids in those 3 groups. Maybe it's 60 kids total. That's great. You got good information. You don't have to do all, 200 kids that might be on the property. You don't have to do them every session. Does that make sense?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
Yep. What else you guys got?
All right, we're 41 minutes in, so if you have to jet, that's totally cool. If you want to hang around and continue to ask questions, that's great as well, but I just want to give you permission to leave.
Oh, for you guys that need to leave, here's what I need. If you will send me, and I'll give you my email address here. If you will send me an email saying, hey, Deb, I'd like to get a copy of that independence measure, do it. I mean, I will be happy to send that to you. If there's another one on there that you'd rather have, I mean, just say that in the email. I don't care. I mean, these things are, you know, they're meant to help you out, and if I can give you one for free to get you started, I'm more than happy to do that. So the email address is just Bialeschki, DBIALES like in Sally, CHKI at ACACAMPS.org. If you Google on our website, it'll come up on there. I'm sure the email address is on there too. But just drop me a note, and I'll be happy to give you a copy of something that's of interest to you to look at. And if you'd like to see like what does this look like in the parent version, or what does this look like for the staff version, let me know that too. I just don't mind sharing. I'm not that much into the money, to tell you the truth. I mean, I have to be because it's my job, but you know what I'm saying. I'd rather you guys had the information and be able to make an informed decision than to make it second guess.
Following up on Ryan's question, I think the way that I would answer that is I would say just the first thing is to identify your why. Why are you interested in measuring outcomes? Because that why is going to help determine what you're going to measure, and we all have different whys. So what is Tommy's reason may not be Tim's reason, may not be my reason. The second thing is certainly you can do things that you think you do well. If you think you do affinity for nature well, then definitely go for that. You can go the other way though. You can also do things you think you do poorly because you want to do them better. And for program improvement. Another way is to look to the future. In the future, what are the skills that society is going to value? So Scott Brody is with, he's working with P21 in the 21st century skills, and so they talk about communication, collaboration, critical thinking, and creativity. And so if you buy that and you think, yes, critical thinking is going to be something that our kids is going to be really valued when our kids get to college, get to the workforce, then go for that. So looking to the future is another great way. But there isn't one one right answer. It's really what's right for you.
Yep. And to remember that on some of these big jargon words like that, like critical thinking, well, you can't go out and just find a measure for critical thinking. Critical thinking is made up of a bunch of different components. And so one of the pieces to critical thinking is usually problem solving. You'll see people talk about that. Or some people say, well, critical thinking is really also about exploration, being willing to, you know, poke around and see what you can find out about something. So, you know, some of these things that get tossed around in the jargon of the day is really a combination of things. And so sometimes you can tackle something like, oh, here's the 21st century learning, you know, stuff that people are talking about. Okay, great. I'm going to measure problem solving, because that's a piece of it. I'm going to measure teamwork, because that's usually a part of, you know, the P21 litany. So if you guys have a question about that on the ACA website, just Google the YOB on our website, and there's a bunch of stuff that will come up there. That's where you find the norms. That's where you can look at the metric stuff. But there's also suggestions for ways of combining some of these measures, like leadership. Well, there's no leadership scale. I mean, that's made up of a bunch of different things. Well, what goes into that? So we've tried to put a few of those things together to give you an idea of how you can measure a concept like leadership or global citizenship or 21st century learning skills. And here are some components that ACA has that would maybe help you do that more global thing.
Tim, did you have a question?
Tim, you're still on mute. Bye, Ryan.
Thank you.
Tim. Oh, there he is.
Bye, Tommy.
Still not there.
CC, Pat?
Yeah, just us? Okay. Actually, Ryan and I need to run too, so thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks,
guys. Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
Bye. Cece, did you have more? Because you started out with some more questions.
Yeah, I actually do have another question. If you could give me a sort of a direction of travel, so to speak. So I'm looking at potential areas. Competence is one that might seem to fit what we want to do.
Yep.
Let's see, I had this pulled up on my screen. Competence, possibly independence, and what was the other one? I could see where interest and exploration would even work for us, potentially. But what is actually measured in some of those? Like, for example, the competence scale. Is it competence in a particular thing that they're doing in camp, or are you just getting at their sense of competence in the items?
Right. It's just at their sense. I was going to try and pull up. Let me get this. This is the staff one. I have the measures right here, so I can try and share those with you. It's not competence in like writing or competence in speaking in front of people or making a drawing. It's competence in general. And again, all of this was based out of the literature review that we did. So when we looked at these, and the fancy name is domains, but when we looked at these different domains and we tried to say, what goes into that, we really did rely a lot on what the literature has said measures these things, and then we did our own testing. So we might start out with 50 different items and boiled it down to like 6 or 7, and those were predicted by what we saw in our metrics. And that's why the affinity for nature short form can be measured in 5 questions, and social skills is in 13. So perceived competence, here's an example of some of the questions, and there are 8 items that measure competence. I am becoming better at understanding new information, becoming better at doing art projects, becoming better at meeting new people, becoming better at taking care of myself, becoming better at learning new things. And so while there's some specifics in there, we found that with kids, kids are so logical and they're so literal that sometimes you had to give them something to be better at. So like the art projects is one thing. And some camps will say, well, we don't do anything with art here. Well, most camps have an arts and craft thing. Most camps do recreation. So they're real broad kinds of things, but it was something to help kids be very literal in looking at this idea of competence. And then some of these things are much more sort of nebulous. It's like, taking care of myself. That can be interpreted a lot of different ways within that child's mind, but that's okay, because that's why we're asking them. We want them to say what they think has been happening to them. Does that make sense to you?
It does. And then I have a follow-up question for that, actually.
Sure.
So it sounds like it's okay to pick and choose the domains that you're measuring, and then within those domains, possibly picking and choosing which items you're measuring?
No.
Or do you need to use it as a whole thing?
Yeah, if you're going to measure competence, you have to ask all 8 of those questions. And that's where, because of the scale structure and sort of the behind the scenes on how scales are created, you can't mess with them too much. You can, these scales were not designed just for camp. They're to be able to be used with after school programs or other youth groups or whatever. So you could take the word camp out and you could put in with my church group or whatever, church youth group. So you can do that kind of word exchange. You can set a context. You can say, thinking about the session that was, that I just did at camp. But sometimes with older kids especially, you might set the context for them. Maybe they've been at camp for 8 years. Well, how much are they going to increase on independence when, they've been there for 8 years and they're now 17. So you can set the context, though. You could say, thinking about your sense of independence, even with the basic version on increase, how much of that increased over this time that you've been coming to, Camp Cali, do you attribute back to being at camp? So think about all the time at Camp Cali, all 8 years. And by the time you're 17, you can do that. Now, a 10-year-old, that would be a struggle. But you know what I'm saying? You can set the context for the way you frame these questions to fit your needs on these things. But as far as actually picking and choosing the questions or changing the wording in there, you can't do that because that destroys the integrity of the item analysis then.
Understand. Okay, thanks.
Sure. Tim, I wish I could hear you.
I wish you could too.
Oh, no, I can. You're back.
Well, you know, what I was going to say was, you know, as you know, Deb, we used the detailed version of the battery last summer for the first time with all of the kids that we send to camp, and for the context of this conversation, Matt, not even sure whether you know, but we're engaging with a multitude of camps, and so we're not in the business of necessarily measuring the specifics of one particular program or looking to see how we can enhance a program, but we're looking at that future view. You know, what is this experience giving the kids that we serve in terms of their potential for whatever we might denote as a successful future? And so we, I think we were pretty successful in being able to gain some great benchmarking last summer, and we're certainly interested to see what information we get back from a similar approach to evaluating all of our kids at all of our camps again this coming summer. But what struck me in this conversation is that because our application is so different to the typical audience in this conversation, but there are certainly folks out there who are running multiple programs or indeed multiple camps, multiple programs at multiple different sites. And it might be that the makeup of their programming at each site is a little bit different.
Yes.
May or may not have a good handle on what outcomes are being derived from the uniqueness of that program. Mm-hmm. And this will present, I think, with a great opportunity, kind of like how we're using it, to be able to define what are the specifics of, from an outcome perspective at each of those different program sites or each of those different camps. Mm-hmm. And certainly can use that in a promotional or a marketing sense to be able to distinguish program by program or camp by camp that they're running. And we've had some pretty good success in being able to say, just with 1 year's worth of data, when we engage with the kids that we serve and send them to whichever of the camps that we partner with, this is what they're telling us about that experience. This is how they're telling us they've grown as a result of going to that camp. We're then planning to take it a step further in the future to be able to say, you know, if you're particularly interested in growing these particular attributes, and we're measuring 9 of the 11 outcomes right now, then these are the programs that we partner with that are more focused in those areas. So consider a summer at that particular program. So we're going to be sort of active in terms of using this data to derive our placement direction for the kids that we serve, but we're also using it in aggregate to be able to say the summer camp experience is developing from a youth development point of view our kids in these areas, and this is terrific, and this is how it ties to their future success. We're actually also tied in with Partnership 21st Century Learning. So that's been terrifically helpful, but I think that's an application for people who are running multiple programs and multiple sites to consider.
It's a great example, Tim. Thanks for bringing it up. I wish everybody would have heard that. That was a great.
I'm sorry.
Well, at least it's working now. At least it's working now. We heard it now. It's recorded, so that's a good thing.
Yeah, and the other thing that we're interested to find out, and maybe this summer being our second year of collecting data will give us some insight, is whether we're able to use this tool or maybe adapt this tool in some way to be able to give each of our kids, as they engage at camp for multiple years, sort of a progressive individual growth profile. This is how I've perceived that I've changed in these areas throughout the aggregate of my time at camp, and I think that would be a really neat thing if we could give them that. And in concept, I feel as though we might be able to, but of course we've got to collect multiple years worth of data and see sort of what picture that presents. But we're excited to explore that.
Yeah, you and I we can kind of talk offline about that, but you totally can. All you have to do is code for that individual child And then when you run your data, you'll just keep, you'll pull out and you'll see multi-year tracking. And on the YOB 2.0, now you guys aren't using the basic yet. You're using, so that the detail is supposed to be worked on this coming fiscal year. So maybe down in the future you'll be able to do that. But even within your own system, you should be able to set up a unique identifier for each kid, and then over time, just like you're saying, you would run the data and you would see what that child looked like around those outcomes on a year-by-year kind of growth status.
Yeah, that's really exciting.
Awesome. Yeah, that's awesome. Awesome.
Deb, if I could ask a practical question about the online version. So if we decide to use just one or two of the domains rather than the entire comprehensive thing, is the online version still available?
Oh, yeah.
So we don't have to get the whole kit and caboodle, so to speak?
No, what you would get on the online one is you would have available to you for the entire year that you are a subscriber, access, and you could create as many different surveys as you wanted. So let's say you're only interested in one or two of the measures right now. Well, that's great. So you would, and the beauty of it is you can do it if you got an internet connection at your camp. You can do it on an iPad or a tablet really simply, and those data just dump off, and you can get your stat reports immediately. So those would be available to you for as much or as long as you wanted during that year, and you could run it. I don't know if you guys are a summer only, but a lot of camps plan to use that YOB. I mean, this is the first year it's been available, so it'll be interesting to see how this works out. But they're planning to use that with their school groups, because you can check and say, you can create as many surveys as you want. So let's say you have a school group that's coming out and you want to do teamwork. Maybe that's not the focus of your summer thing. You can access that. So what I'm saying is that when you subscribe, you get all of the scales available to you for as much as you want to use them during that year. And they will always be there. Let's say you subscribe this year, and then next year you go, oh, we got a big change over in our camp stuff. We really don't want to measure this year. And so then you come back in the third year and you're like, oh, okay, we're ready to get on board again. That's great. The data you collected that first year is still there for you. Your account just sort of renews again. So you don't ever lose any of your data.
I really like that aspect of it. And on the tracking of individual kids, you just give them a unique identifier such as a number, or?
Yeah, that's something for you guys to figure out. And sometimes, I'm a proponent of asking asking some of your kids even, hey, what are you going to remember? Is it going to be your initials and your birth date? Do you want to pick out your favorite, whatever, character? There's all different kinds of ways of doing it. I usually go for what's going to be the absolute most bomb-proof way, knowing that there's nothing that's bomb-proof. But if you ask for the kids to give their initials, even that you have to be very explicit on. It's like, I want all three of your names, your first, your middle, your last, so it's initials, MDB. And then your birthday, it's going to be, 5/26, or it's going to be the year, or whatever it is. You have to be really, really explicit. Write it down, and then the next year when they come back, you go, okay, now remember, this is what we asked for last year. Make sure you put in the exact same thing, because if they don't, then you're not going to find them. You're going to have to go through and hand coordinate, something if somebody only puts in their first and last initials and not their middle.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Could it be something like a student number that we have on record?
Yep.
Or? Okay.
Yep. And if you're going to track individually, there's always the concern about privacy and student privacy. So usually, I know some camps that use the kids' names. Because they're the only ones that's going to be accessing the data. It kind of depends on how you plan to protect your data. But if it's just you and another staff person that's going to be accessing that, heck, a name's fine, so long as those data are never shared with anybody else.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And we have a program within a program that's grant funded, and I would really be interested in doing some long-term study of individual campers or individual participants that this would really lend itself to.
You and Tim need to talk, because Tim, that's exactly what he's doing, only from the funders standpoint. I mean, they're tracking the kids that are being supported with the foundation money. So, I mean, he's got a slightly different angle, but it's the same idea of wanting to track kids across time to see impact. So the two of you guys should kind of pony up some time and share stories.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, Deb, I have a quick question. I think picking up on a comment that you just made.
Sure.
I mean, I should know the answer to this. Is it a one-time subscription or an annual subscription?
Annual. And it's really super cheap. For an accredited camp, the subscription rate is $75 for the whole year. So I think when I went online this summer and was kind of checking around to see what, you know, commercial places were charging, I think the cheapest I ever saw was $169 a month. So ours is considered, now, you know, it's basic. We don't have a ton of bells and whistles, and some of these others that you pay a ton of money for has got some really nice features, but I mean, ours covers the basic. So we felt like an annual subscription was fair. And depending on whether you're a accredited camp or a member camp or an outside camp, you pay a differential amount, but there's still, the most that anybody pays is $250 for a whole year, which, I mean, is sinfully cheap for what you get.
Great.
Guys, I have a 4 o'clock that I'm late for, so I got to run. If I could let this run, I would. But unfortunately, I got the controls here. Thank you very much, Deb, for doing this. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. This is wonderful, and I hope we get to see you again real soon.
Yeah, my pleasure. And you guys make sure you follow up and send me an email with what you want to take a look at. Now, Tim, you already got yours, so.
Yeah, and Cece, if you have any questions and you're interested to follow up, feel free to give me a call. Are we connected by email through?
That's a good question. You know what? I'm going to send Cece an email anyway, so I'll make sure that she gets your email, Tim.
Perfect. Thanks.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, you guys, for jumping on here, and thank you so much, Matt.
Yep, of course. Bye.
Thank you, Deb.
Bye.
Bye-bye.